Have you ever felt a place pulling on your breath? Not your body, not your feet, but the breath behind your breath. The one you don't notice until the air thickens. Have you heard the call of something that was never a sound at all, but more like the hush before thunder? Some say El Dorado is a myth, a fable to lead men astray, a shining lie buried in vines and madness. But others whisper softer truths, that the city was never gold at all. Only and light, like memory, can vanish the moment you try to hold it. We want you to know, you are safe now. You are loved. You are welcome here, exactly as you are. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now take a deep breath. Grab your coffee if you like, and let us begin. It begins in a mist. Of course, there is always mist in the Amazon, but this was not the usual mist, warm and restless. This was a mist that shimmered gold as it moved. Not bright, not shining, but heavy, ancient gold, like the patina on forgotten coins. It moved between trees and curled low around stones that had not been touched by light in generations. And in that golden fog walked a woman, alone. They say her name was Hy-Brasil, though the river gods called her something older. She was born in a village that no longer appears on maps, though the roots remember her steps. Her eyes were the color of raw amber, not the polished kind you wear around the neck, but the kind that still holds a trapped insect, still warm with the memory of the sun. Hy-Brasil did not chase El Dorado. She guarded its echo. Each morning before the sun had touched the river, she would trace the same path through the trees, carrying a clay bowl and a curved blade carved from obsidian. She would walk in silence. The jungle knew her. The vines parted for her, and the golden mist followed. You must understand, this was not treasure, not gold to hold or hoard. It was breath made visible. Memory so old it forgot how to speak. El Dorado was not a place. It was a silence that shimmered. They say Hy-Brasil came from a line of watchers, women who never left the forest, never spoke their own names, never aged. Their task was not to find El Dorado, but to ensure no one else did, because those who found it never returned. But it was not death that waited. It was forgetting. One dusk, as the frogs began their chorus and the light tipped sideways through the canopy, a man arrived. He wore boots that had not yet softened to the earth, and eyes that were too loud for the forest. He did not bow to the trees. He did not taste the wind. He carried a blade of shining metal, not obsidian, not sacred, just cold. Hy-Brasil met him by the mirror pool. This pool, rimmed in black stones and orchid vines, reflected nothing but sky. Even on the darkest nights, it showed stars no one had named. The man asked her if she knew the way to El Dorado. He said he had maps. He had heard stories. He had followed the flight of birds and the curve of rivers. He said he was close. She said nothing. Instead, she offered him a bowl of water. He drank, and in that moment his voice fell quiet. What he saw then, no one can say, but he wept silently. And when he looked back up, the golden fog had begun to rise. It is said that those who see the city forget their name, not just the one their mother gave them, but the one their soul wears. The true name, the first breath, the shape. The stars wrote in them. The man stayed with Hy-Brasil for 7 days. He followed her path. He ate the bitter roots. He listened to the songs of birds that sang only once and never again. He forgot how to speak. He forgot why he had come. And on the 8th day, she led him to the place the sun forgets. Here, the trees grow in a spiral, not naturally, not randomly. The spiral is perfect, measured, wide at the edges, tight at the center. At the very heart stands a stone, waist high, smooth as glass. It is said that if you touch the stone, it hums with a note too low for ears. The sound is not a sound. It is memory, waking up. He placed his hand on it, and the fog swallowed him. Hy-Brasil did not wait. She turned and walked away. She returned to her path, her bowl, her blade, her silence. For this was the truth. El Dorado is not made of gold. It is made of everything you have ever forgotten. Every lullaby your grandmother whispered that vanished before you could remember it. Every color the sky once held before the eyes of men turned away. Every ancient truth that crumbled under the weight of greed. It is not a city. It is a return. To what? Only the mist knows. And so it was. Itzel walked on, and though her feet left no mark, and her name was no longer spoken, the jungle knew her. Some nights, when the frogs fall silent too suddenly, when the fog curls strangely at your door, you may see a shimmer, not bright, but soft, like memory catching its breath. And if you ever dream of spiral trees and a stone that hums beneath your hand, do not speak, do not chase it. Not all treasures are meant to be found. Some are meant to be remembered, softly, from a distance. Let the light be. Let the silence hold it. Let it go. But the mists hold another tale. Have you ever wandered so far into silence that the trees seem to breathe around you? Have you stood beneath a canopy so thick, so still, that even time forgot how to move? There are places like that, deep in the Amazon. Places not charted by rivers or routes, but by memory itself. And in those places where no birds sing and no foot dares fall twice, something stirs. Something older than the first word. Something that once had a name, but swallowed it whole. They say the Mapinguari walks there, or limps, or waits. No one truly knows, for to see it is to forget you ever had eyes. But still, there is one story that survived, whispered on nights, when the moon turns its face. A story of a boy and a beast, and the silence that changed them both. His name was Keel, a boy born with a crooked foot and a voice so quiet. Even the birds leaned close when he spoke. He lived in a village of hunters, warriors, weavers, all strong and swift, sun-browned and proud. But Kale, he listened more than he ran. He watched the forest instead of chasing it, and the forest, in turn, watched him back. From the time he was small, he would sit by the edge of the dark grove, the place no one entered, and listen to the hush beyond. Others said it was cursed. That inside lived the beast, who could not die. A creature with one glowing eye in the center of its face. A giant, covered in matted red fur, whose stench wilted the air, and whose voice made the birds forget how to sing. Mapinguari. That was the name, but Kale did not fear it. Not truly, because when the wind came from that grove, he felt not fear, but sorrow. He did not tell anyone this, not his mother, whose hands smelled of clay and tobacco, not his brother, who painted war symbols on his arms. Kale simply listened, and one evening when the dusk settled like ash and the frogs fell strangely silent, Kale followed the hush into the grove. He walked with bare feet. The forest floor was damp, but not cold. Each step was like falling deeper into sleep. He passed under trees that leaned close, bark spiraling in unnatural patterns. He heard no birds, no crickets, no leaves, only his own breath, soft, steady, and something else. Something slower, deeper. A breath, not his own. And then he saw it. Not clearly, no. The Mapinguari does not let itself be seen like a creature. It is more like a shape inside shadow. A redness that does not belong, a presence that makes the air curl inwards. Kale did not scream. He did not run. He bowed, a slow, trembling motion. Not out of bravery, but because in that moment, he understood. This was no monster. This was grief, given form, and grief does not like to be seen. The Mapinguari shifted. The air around it thickened. Then, its eye, the one in its chest, opened. It did not shine. It wept, tears not made of water, but of memory. Sticky, thick, dark as sap. And Kale, heart pounding, whispered, What did you lose? The creature stopped, its massive head tilted. Not in rage, not in hunger, but in wonder. No one had ever asked it that before. And so the Mapinguari spoke, not with words, but with scent, with visions, with pulses in the earth. Kael saw flashes, a man with tattoos of the sun on his chest, a shaman, wrapped in green, speaking to spirits with smoke. This man had once walked like Kael, softly, listening, loving the tree he had once healed, but he had wanted more, to cure death itself. So he drank from a forbidden spring, a pool, guarded by silence and watched by serpents made of mist. He drank and changed, not into something stronger, but into something that could not forget. He remembered every death, every illness, every face that ever wept, and his body changed to hold it all. That was the price. A gift turned curse. The Mapinguari was not evil. It was memory that had nowhere else to go. Kael wept, not for himself, but for the shaman, for the sorrow that had nowhere to rest. And in that moment, the beast stepped forward. Each step thundered softly, not in sound, but in breath. It knelt impossibly, and placed one enormous hand against Kael's chest. And Kael, not with eyes, but with his bones, his blood, he saw the roots of time, the ache of the soil, the songs of trees sung in forgotten tongues. He saw the face of the man inside the beast, eyes soft, mouth quiet, hands shaking, and then it was gone. The air cleared, the mist faded. Kael stood alone, but he was not the same. He returned to the village, but his eyes were changed. They were too deep, too quiet. The elders noticed. They asked what he had seen. He said nothing. Instead, he sang, not loudly, not for crowds, but at the edge of the grove, each dusk, he sang a low, ancient song, a song without words, a song that made the frogs pause and the trees sway, a song for the beast who remembered too much. And it is said that the grove softened, that green returned where rot had ruled, that children no longer feared the trees, but bowed gently as they passed. The Mapinguari was never seen again, but sometimes a scent, earthy, heavy, not unpleasant, passes through the village. And Kael, now old and gray, simply nods. He touches his chest, over his heart, and whispers, "I remember." You see, some monsters are born of forgetting, but others, the quiet ones, are made of remembering too deeply. So when you hear a silence too full, when the wind holds its breath for just a moment too long, ask yourself, is it fear you feel, or sorrow? Sometimes they wear the same skin. And further still, there is one more story. Have you ever watched a river at dusk? Not just looked, but truly watched. When the surface turns to glass, and the sky bleeds into water, and every reflection seems to blink once, slowly, before settling. There are rivers in the Amazon that do not sleep. They whisper long after the fish have stilled, and the frogs have silenced. They carry voices that do not belong to the living. And some say, if your name is called from the current, you must never answer, because not all ghosts wear white. Some wear your face, some borrow your breath, and some come from beneath the water, smooth as mirrors, smiling just like you. This is the story of Maniva, an old fisherwoman who lived where the trees leaned close to the river, where the boats were carved by hand and the nets mended in silence. Her house was a quiet one, all wood and rope and time, the kind of house that smells like smoke and memory. Niwa had lived alone for many seasons. They said she was touched by the spirits, not cursed, not blessed, just because she sang to the river in a voice that no one else could echo, not beautiful, not sweet, but haunting, a melody without words, one that made dogs stop barking and birds forget to fly. She never spoke of where the song came from, only that it was given to her, one evening, by something that rose from the water. It was a day like any other, sun thick, air humming. Mieva had rowed her boat farther than usual, toward a bend in the river where the current curled and the trees grew twisted. She cast her net, waited, and just as the first stars blinked awake in the sky, she felt it, not a tug, but a pulse. Something below, waiting, breathing. She leaned over the side of the boat and saw her reflection. But it wasn't her, not quite. The face was hers. Yes, the same lines, the same silver braid down the shoulder. But the eyes were wrong. Not darker, not brighter, just emptier. Like they'd seen something she hadn't. And then the reflection opened its mouth and sang, soft, low, not loud enough to scare, but enough to pierce. Maeva felt it in her chest, a vibration that settled behind her ribs. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a greeting. It was a remembering. She blinked, and the reflection was gone. Only ripples remained, and a stillness so deep it felt holy. She returned home that night without her catch, but with a song. It sat on her tongue like ash. She sang it once, and her lantern went out. She sang it twice, and the wind bent sideways. She sang it 3 times, and dreamt of drowned children whispering in her ear, asking for lullabies. From that night on, Morneva sang every dusk, to calm the ghosts, she said, to remind the river it had not been forgotten, because that's what the river wanted, really. Not tribute, not sacrifice, just memory. You see, there were once people who lived on the river's edge, who made their lives by rhythm. Not clocks, not seasons, but current, shadow, moonlight. They spoke to the water like a friend, offered stories into its flow. But then others came, with noise, with fire, with nets that tore instead of held, and the river began to mourn. Some say the river ghosts were born from this mourning, not of the dead, but of the forgotten, but faces erased by time. Songs never finished. Children never sung to sleep. They took form in dusk, when shadows stretched long enough to hold memory. One night, a boy from the village, curious, brave, foolish, followed Maleva to the water. He wanted to know if the tales were true, if the ghosts were real. Mieva warned him, "Don't speak if the river calls your name." He nodded, but didn't understand. They sat, waited, watched the light die slowly over the current. And then it came. A ripple, a shape, and a voice. "Lucio," it whispered. The boy froze. The voice was perfect. It was his mother's. But his mother had been gone for 3 years. "Lucio," it said again. This time softer, like breath inside glass. He turned, stood, stepped forward. Mieva grabbed his wrist, shook her head. "Not her," she whispered. "It's not her. It wears her voice, but it does not know her heart." Lucio trembled. The voice called again, and then another joined it. This one sounded like his sister, then a friend, then himself. The water shimmered with faces, all his, smiling, blinking, waiting. He fell to his knees. Mieva knelt beside him, began to hum. Not the haunting song, but a softer one from before, one she barely remembered. The river stirred. The faces blinked, once, then twice, and vanished. The boy wept, and Mieva held him. The river, soothed, settled back into its hush. They walked home in silence, and Lucio never spoke of it again. But he never feared the water, only respected it. Mieva continued to sing, every dusk, every day, until her voice grew thin with age, her lungs too shallow for song. And on the final night, when even the moon seemed to bow low, she walked alone to the riverbank. No one followed. No one asked. They say she stepped into the water without sound, that the current didn't carry her, but held her gently, like a child. And just before the dawn, a song rose from the river. Her voice, but not hers. Younger, clearer, wrapped in silence. A gift, perhaps, or a goodbye. Now, every so often when the dusk falls just right, when the water mirrors the sky and the frogs fall silent, a melody drifts across the current. Not loud, not pleading, just remembering. And if you hear your name in that melody, do not answer, not unless your heart is calm, your memory clear, and your spirit rooted. Because the river ghosts do not steal. They invite. They only take what is already adrift. But the story does not end there. Have you ever stared into still water and seen something that looked like you, but wasn't? Not just a reflection, but a watcher, a presence behind the glassy skin of the river, waiting, listening, remembering. There are pools in the Amazon that never ripple, no matter the wind. Their silence is not natural. It is chosen. And in those waters, they say she waits. Yora, the bride of the river, the mirror who became a woman, or the woman who became a mirror. No one agrees on which came first, but all who tell the tale speak with lowered eyes and hushed breath, because Yara is not a name. It is a warning. The tale begins in a village wrapped in vines, a place where the trees leaned close enough to whisper to the roofs, where the women wore feathers in their hair and the men painted their faces with charcoal and ash. It was a village that belonged to water, its sleep, its breath, its sorrow. And in this village was a girl. Her name was Yara, skin like river clay, hair dark as the belly of the night, eyes too bright, not in color, but in depth. She did not speak often, but when she did, even the insects seemed to hush. She was not feared, nor loved, but watched, as though the village knew she belonged to something else, something not meant to walk among fire and bone. They say she spent her days beside a certain pool, one hidden behind thorny vines and fallen trees, deep in the folds of the forest. The pool was not large, not wide or deep, but it held something most water forgets: stillness. Even in the heaviest rains, it did not stir. No frogs leapt from it. No birds drank from it. It was mirror and memory and memory, and it belonged to her. No one followed her there, not out of respect, but out of fear. She would sit for hours, bare feet in the mud, watching the water. Not her reflection, no, but something beneath it, something that only she could see. Some said it was her sister, drowned long ago. Others whispered it was her own soul, trapped in the water, refusing to return. But Yara never spoke of it, until the day she vanished. It was dusk, the air thick with smoke from cooking fires, the sky bruised and heavy. A boy, young, foolish, curious, had followed her. He wanted to see what she saw, to look into the water and understand. He hid behind a fig tree, watched her kneel beside the pool, watched her lean forward, and then he swore. She stepped into the water, not fell, not slipped, stepped, like one returning home. There was no splash, no scream, no ripple, only stillness, and the slow rise of mist from the surface. The boy ran, words falling from his mouth like stones. The village searched. They found her footprints, but no body, no trace, only the pool, watching, waiting. After that, strange things began to happen. A young girl went missing while fetching water. Her sandals were found beside the still pool, but nothing else. A hunter returned from the forest, silent, pale and mute. He could not speak, only point toward the water, his eyes forever reflecting something no one else could see. And always, always, when the mist rose from the pool, voices came with it, soft, female, familiar. They whispered names, sang lullabies half-remembered, laughed in ways that made the spine ache. The elders said Yara had become a spirit, a guardian, or a thief, that she had traded her flesh for memory, that the mirror had claimed her, or perhaps she had claimed it. The truth, It is hard to say. But there was one woman who claimed to know, an old midwife with fingers like roots and a mouth full of stories. She said Yara had looked too long into the pool, long enough for the reflection to grow curious, that it reached up and took her place, not out of cruelty, but out of hunger, because reflections, too, long to be real. They watch, always. They know us. But they are never held, never kissed, never wept for, until Yara. She let it in, or was pulled in. The midwife said there was a way to see the truth. To find her, you had to go alone, at night, without fire, without voice. Bring no iron, no salt, only a mirror, small, simple, glass-backed. Hold it to the pool, wait, and if you are lucky or unlucky, you will see not your own face, but hers. And if she blinks, do not blink back, because that is how she calls you. And those who answer do not return. So now the pool remains, still, glossy, unmoved. The villagers do not speak her name. They walk a wide path around the vines. Children are taught from their first breath to never stare too long into water, because it remembers. And sometimes it reaches, but there are those who say that not all who go to the pool are taken, that some go and leave offerings, petals, shells, tiny mirrors wrapped in leaf. And on rare nights, when the moon hangs low and the mist is silver, they hear her voice, Yara, not crying, not laughing, just humming, a song without words, a lullaby too old to name. And in that sound, some say they feel peace, not fear, not longing, but the soft ache of something remembered, something just out of reach, because Yara was never a monster. She was a mirror, and mirrors do not lie. They only reflect. So when you pass still water, when the world quiets, and your reflection stares back just a little too long, ask yourself, is that you, truly, or is something else watching? Look gently, look softly, and if you must look at all, do not blink. Let the water keep its secrets. And still, the jungle breathes another name. Have you ever walked a path that did not stay behind you, where each step felt known, as though someone else had just passed, but backward? Have you felt the hush of branches that leaned too close, not to harm, but to hear? There are places in the Amazon where sleep does not live, not because of danger, nor fear, but because the trees do not rest. Their roots shift when you're not watching. Their shadows fold back in on themselves. And the forest breathes, not like a wind, but like a creature. Old, patient, awake. They say this forest lies deep beyond the mapped lands, past the oxbow rivers, beyond the drumming calls of the howler monkeys. You cannot stumble upon it. You must be invited. And it invited her. Her name was Neela, a hunter by necessity, a mother by quiet devotion. She lived at the edge of the known forest, in a hut built of woven bark and steady hands. Her daughter Lay was born without sight, eyes pale as river pearls, gaze always tilted upward, as if listening to things no one else could hear. And indeed she did. From the time she could speak, Lay would hum to the vines, laugh at the breeze, and whisper words into the floorboards of their home, as though the earth beneath carried stories in its grain. Neela loved her fiercely, but she feared what Lady might be touching. What world she heard? The villagers warned her. Blind children are close to the spirit line. They see with their dreams. They do not belong fully to this side. But Neela silenced them with a glance, and raised her daughter in the hush of the tray line, teaching her by rhythm, scent, and touch. Together, they lived like thread and needle, until the season of dark rains came early, and the jungle grew hungry. Animals fled deeper. The rivers overflowed, pulling canoes into their teeth, and food grew scarce. So Neela went hunting, deeper than she ever had, deeper than the names on any map. Lay stayed behind, sitting cross-legged on the floor, fingers tracing invisible patterns into the wood. And she said, as Neela stepped out, "Be gentle with the forest. It remembers everything." Neela paused, then smiled. She thought it only a child's poetry, but the words clung. By dusk, the air had thickened, not with fog, but with something older. The trees stood too straight, their trunks too smooth, and the path she followed began to loop. She marked a tree with her blade, then hours later found the mark again, not faded, fresh. She had not moved forward. She had circled, and yet she had not turned. The forest had. She stopped, kneeled, listened, not to the leaves, not to the insects, but to the silence. It was not empty. It was watching. And then she heard it. Soft footsteps, not her own. She turned. Nothing, but the scent of crushed fern rose behind her. And then a whisper. Neela, her name, spoken like a memory. She stepped forward slowly, as though moving through sleep, and found a clearing, not large, but impossible. It was a perfect circle, where no trees grew, but where vines knotted into shapes that hummed. There, in the center, sat a stone, small, carved, worn with age. She touched it, and the air shifted. Suddenly she was not standing in the forest. She was sitting beside her daughter, Leha's hand in hers, as it had been many moons ago. But then she blinked, and the child was not Leisao. It was her own mother, then her grandmother, then herself, as a girl. Time peeled backward like bark in heat, and the forest showed her everything, her ancestors, their feet walking the same trail, their songs layered into roots, their sorrows soaked into the soil. The jungle was not a place. It was memory, alive. Each tree a witness, each leaf a word, and the path a heartbeat. She wept, not from fear, but from knowing how small she was, and yet how needed. Then the voice came again, not from the clearing, but from within. Do not forget the ones who walked before you. Do not forget the girl who sees without eyes. She hears us. We are not gone. And just like that, Nelia was returned, back to the path, back to her blade. The air felt lighter, the forest kinder. She returned home at dawn. Lei met her at the door. You saw it, the child said, not as a question, but as truth. Neela nodded, then sat beside her daughter, and for the first time asked her to speak, and Lei told her everything. How the trees sing in pulses, how the roots whisper names, how the night hums like a drum when it dreams. And Neela listened. Truly, from that day on, they stopped hunting beep. They planted, they blessed the soil, they named each seed, and each evening they sat in silence. Lei Hamar, Neela holding her hand. Sometimes, rarely, travelers pass through their land, and some claim that, if you listen just right, you can hear the forest breathing. Not wind, not beasts, but breath. Slow, steady, endless. The kind of breath that remembers. So if you ever find yourself walking a path that turns too often, or if the same bird crosses your sight more than once, pause, place your hand on the nearest trunk, bow your head, and whisper, I remember. The forest will hear, and it will watch, but it will not harm you, unless you forget. Because this forest does not sleep, and it never forgets those who belong. But hush, for one last breath remains. Have you ever stood at the foot of a mountain and felt it watching you? Not the wind, not the bird, but the stone itself, as if behind its moss and cracks and vines, something waited, not sleeping, not awake, simply waiting. There are mountains in the Amazon that do not rise from earth. They descend from sky, folded into cloud, sheathed in fog, so thick that even the sun cannot find them. And within one of them, a god once hid its wings. This is the tale of Karu, the moth god. Not a god in the way temples speak, not loud, not crowned, but soft, hidden, winged like silence itself. They say Karu came before language, when dreams still walked in daylight, and men had not yet forgotten how to bow. It lived beneath a mountain that never had a name, because names could not hold it. To name a thing is to limit it. Karu was not meant to be limited. only honored. This mountain loomed above a forgotten village, where clouds lived low, and children were born with silver dust in their hair. The people there spoke few words. They sang more than they spoke, and they slept in rhythms that echoed the beating of wings. Each dusk they lit no fire, not out of fear, but reverence, because that was when the moths came, silent, massive, wings like veils of dusk. They blanketed the trees, covered the ground, and if you listened, you could hear them breathing. No one harmed them, no one touched. They belonged to Karu. The villagers believed that the god lived beneath the roots of the mountain, folded in shadow, wrapped in wings the size of sails. It did not need temples. It did not need altars. It only needed quiet, and so they gave it. They spoke gently, moved slowly, and told stories in the hush between songs, until the silence was broken. It began when a man from beyond the mist arrived, his boots loud, his breath too sharp. He came with metal tools and a voice that cracked like fire. He said he was a scholar, that he sought truth, that he meant no harm. But truth does not come to the mountain. It must be taken away, and mountains do not forget such thefts. The man built a camp at the base, chopped down trees that bled sap like milk, drilled into stone that sang when struck, and each night he lit fires that reached too high. The moths came less often, their wings dulled, their silence grew heavy, and one night the mountain stirred. The villagers knew it before they heard it. Their sleep turned restless. Children woke crying without tears. The animals vanished, and the mist began to taste, sweet, too sweet, like decay. Then came the sound, not thunder, not quake, but wings. Wings too large to belong to any living thing. Wings that moved without air. Wings that beat in time with heartbeats, but not human ones. The mountain split, not visibly, but in presence, and Karu rose, not with anger, but with ache. It was beautiful and terrible. Its wings were vast, not dusty, but shimmering with 1,000 memories. Its body was not beast, not human, but something in between, made of size and silk and time. It did not speak. It did not need to. The villagers fell to their knees. The man did not. He stared, open-mouthed, awed, but not humbled. He reached for his lantern, lifted it to see, to study, to understand, and the light struck Haru's face. The moth god recoiled, not from pain, but from being seen. There are beings that live best in shadow. To see them fully is to wound them. To define them is to break them. The god fluttered, then vanished, but not before the dust. It fell from its wings like snow, covered the ground, the trees, the man, and the next morning he could not speak. His words were gone, not forgotten, taken. Every journal he kept turned blank. Every photograph melted into blur. The god had not struck in rage. It had unmade. The villagers understood. They gathered their children. They sang the old songs again, low, slow. They did not blame the god. They had failed to keep the quiet. They returned to stillness, burned no fire, sang only in breath, and the mountain closed again, not in stone, but in spirit. Now they say, Karu sleeps again. But sometimes, when the mist hangs too heavy, and moths gather in great numbers, you can feel it, a presence in the hush, a warmth beneath your ribs, a beat of wings in the back of your thoughts. And if you dream of a face that has none, a whisper made of light, do not fear. It is only the god remembering you, or asking to be remembered. You see, some gods do not want worship, only silence, only space, only the soft unfolding of wings in the dark. So the next time you see a moth pressed gently against your window, do not shoo it away. Let it rest. Let it listen. Let it watch. For it may carry the breath of a god, too soft to speak. And the mountain still listens for the hush that once was. But listen, there is yet another name whispered in the wind. Have you ever heard music that felt too old, too heavy with memory, too stained with sorrow to be called a song? Not beautiful, but necessary. Like a sound the forest itself had swallowed for centuries, and finally let slip. They say such music exists, and it does not come from wood or string. It comes from bone, carved by hands that no longer breathe, played by mouths that should not remember how. This is the story of the jaguar priests, and the flute that could summon silence. It begins in the deepest red earth basin, where the trees bleed sap, the color of blood, and the roots twist like limbs in sleep. There, long ago, stood a temple without walls. Its roof was the canopy, its altar was the dirt. This was the home of the jaguar priests, not kings, not warriors, but keepers of the death song. They wore robes made of shadow fur, not taken from beasts, but given by the jungle itself. Their faces were painted with ash, their eyes hidden behind jaguar bone masks, and around their neck each wore a flute, long, pale, carved from femur, smooth and cold. They called it the hollow cry, because that is what it made, not music, but memory, the kind that pulls breath from your chest and lays it at the feet of ghosts. These priests did not speak. They did not eat among others. They lived in solitude, and once each moon they gathered, 7 in all, to play the song. It is said the first time they played, the wind itself stopped to listen. Birds dropped mid-flight, rivers paused, and the dead stirred in their sleep, not in pain, not in terror, but in yearning, because the song was not for the living. It was for the in-between, for those caught beneath vines of memory, for souls not yet ready to drift. The jaguar priests were bridges, their flutes ladders, and for many seasons they kept the balance. They guided the silent ones back to silence. But one priest broke the rhythm. His name was Oru. He was the youngest, barely grown when chosen, but his heart was not quiet. It pulsed too fiercely, loved too quickly, grieved too deeply. He fell in love with a girl from the outer village. Her name was Sarah. She wore laughter like gold. Her voice was the kind that softened even the roughest winds. He watched her from behind his bone mask, and though he was sworn to silence, his flute betrayed him. One dusk, he played a note not meant to be played, a note of longing, of ache, of flesh, and the jungle noticed. The hollow cry split. Its tone turned crooked. Instead of guiding souls home, it woke something else, something beneath, older than jaguar, older than man, a hunger bound in roots and stone. The others knew at once. They gathered. They surrounded Oru in the clearing, and together they played a song of stilling, a song that could seal. But the damage had been done. A shadow opened in the earth, brief but wide, a mouth without teeth. Surah vanished, pulled not in body, but in breath. Her song ceased. Oru screamed, the first voice he had used in years. He shattered his mask. He ran. The priests disbanded. The flutes were buried in a circle around the clearing. The temple faded. Trees reclaimed the altar. But some say one flute remained, Oriza's. He kept it, carried it far beyond the forest. They say he wandered from village to village, never speaking, only playing at dusk, not for death, not for passage, but for memory, for the echo of a voice he once loved. And it is said, if you hear bone music in the forest, you must not follow it, not unless your heart is steady, not unless your sorrow is clean, because the hollow cry does not just call the dead, it calls what lies beneath them. Even now, deep in forgotten paths, people find bones, with holes carved smooth, not by animal, not by weather, but by ritual, and if the wind blows through them just right, they sing, not loudly, but enough. Enough to make you pause, to ache, to remember something you never lived. It is said that the jaguar priests left no heirs. But once every generation, a child is born with ash-dark eyes and an unearned sadness. They take to the forest and are never seen again, only heard, in the space between trees, in the hush before sleep. So if you ever walk beneath moonless canopy and hear a note that feels like a question you've always carried, stop. Bow. Place your palm on the earth and whisper, I grieve what I do not know. The forest will understand, the song will pass, and the hollow cry will move on. Because not all music is made for joy. Some is made for remembering, for softening the sharp edge of forgetting. And the bone flute still waits